The prairie wind carried the smell of smoke long before the girl saw the fires. She had been walking the edge of the settlement with her little brother when the thunder of horses came like a storm over the earth. The boy had run back to the cabin, but she, slower, burdened by a basket of kindling, was caught in the chaos. Comanche riders swept down with painted faces and war cries that rattled her bones. The last she remembered clearly was her brother's scream and the sound of her father's rifle cracking once, then falling silent. When she woke again, she was tied to the back of a horse, the world swaying beneath her. The riders spoke in a tongue she could not understand, voices sharp and commanding, laughter cutting through the evening air. Her wrists burned from the rope, and every step of the horse jarred her sore body. She was no longer a daughter or sister, just a prize taken in the raid. At first she prayed they would kill her quickly. Stories whispered among settlers told of women taken by tribes, and none of them ended with mercy. Fear swallowed her whole as the riders carried her deeper into the wilderness, away from the life she knew. Her home, her people, her God, it all seemed to vanish behind her, swallowed by the endless plains. The village came into view near midnight, firelight flickering against the hides of teepees. Dogs barked, children darted in excitement, and women stared at her with mixed curiosity and suspicion. The men dismounted, dragging her forward. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. She stumbled, but strong hands pushed her upright until she stood before an elder whose face was etched with lines of command. Words were exchanged, an argument, from the tones, and then a decision was made. The elder gestured toward a young man among the warriors, his chest bare, painted with ochre, his eyes sharp as obsidian. He could not have been more than 20, yet the authority in his stance was undeniable. His gaze cut over her like a blade, assessing, judging, claiming. The elder spoke again, and the villagers nodded in agreement. The girl did not understand the language, but she understood enough. She was being given to him. The young warrior stepped forward. His hand gripped her arm, not cruelly, but with the certainty of ownership. The crowd murmured approval, some laughing, others watching in silence. A few women whispered, eyes narrowing at the stranger who would now become part of their people through force. The girl tried to wrench free, her voice breaking into sobs, but no one listened. Her captor pulled her toward a teepee at the edge of the circle. Inside, furs covered the ground, weapons leaned against poles, and the air smelled of smoke and sage. He released her arm, speaking a short phrase she could not grasp, and then left, leaving her trembling in the dim firelight. That night she curled into the corner, her body shaking. She could not sleep, for every sound outside made her flinch. She thought of her family. Had her brother survived? Was her father alive? Or had she lost them all? Tears came until her eyes ached, but exhaustion finally dragged her into fitful dreams. When morning broke, she was summoned outside. The young warrior stood waiting, his expression unreadable. He placed a piece of bread-like food into her hand, then pointed at the river where other women carried buckets. His meaning was clear. She was to fetch water. She hesitated, unsure if it was a test or a trick, but his steady gaze forced her compliance. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. She was given tasks: grinding corn, gathering wood, carrying water. The women watched her with suspicion, correcting her roughly when she erred, sometimes mocking her clumsiness. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but the village was surrounded by endless plains with nowhere to hide. Her captor visited her often, though he spoke little. Sometimes he gave her food, sometimes only a look that left her skin crawling. He was not cruel, not in the way she expected, but he was not gentle either. His presence reminded her that her fate was sealed. On the third night, the village held a feast. Drums pounded, voices lifted in chants, and dancers moved in circles around the fire. The girl was brought forward again, dressed in a doe-skin garment that smelled of smoke and new stitching. The elder raised his voice, speaking words of ceremony. The young warrior stood beside her, solemn and proud. It was a wedding. Though she could not understand the vows, she understood their weight. She was no longer a captive alone, she was a wife, bound to a man she had never chosen in a tribe she did not know. Her heart sank as the people cheered, the fire blazing higher, the drums echoing like the pounding of her fear. That night, when they returned to the teepee, she braced herself for the worst. But the young warrior did not force her. Instead, he lay down across the furs with his back to her, silent, leaving space between them. It was a strange mercy, one she had not expected, but it did little to ease the terror in her chest. Days turned to weeks. She remained his wife in name, though their bond was nothing but chains and silence. She learned fragments of his language, piecing together meaning from gestures and tone. She discovered his name, Tahan. It meant wolf in their tongue, the other women told her, some with grudging respect, others with envy. She learned, too, that he was not yet a chief but carried the weight of expectation. His father had been a leader, fallen in battle, and the tribe looked to Tahan to follow the same path. Perhaps that was why he had claimed her, proof of his strength, a symbol of his power. Still, the girl could not see him as anything but her captor. Each time he entered the teepee, her stomach knotted with dread. Each word he spoke was a reminder that she no longer belonged to herself. And yet, beneath the fear, a strange spark flickered. She noticed the way he carried himself with discipline, how others obeyed his voice without question. She saw the moments when he spared her from harsher tasks, when he shielded her from ridicule, when his gaze lingered not with cruelty but with something unspoken. But she smothered that spark, burying it beneath anger and grief. For she was the captive bride taken by force, bound to a man she had not chosen. And no matter what kindness he showed, she could not forget the fire, the raid, the sound of her brother's scream fading into the night. Her story had only begun. The days after the wedding ceremony stretched out like an endless punishment. The girl awoke each morning to the sounds of the village stirring, children laughing, women grinding corn, men preparing horses for hunting or raiding, and every sound reminded her she did not belong. She was not one of them, not a wife by choice, not a sister or daughter in this tribe. She was something else, a reminder of war, a trophy. Tahan, the young warrior now called her husband, treated her with a distant firmness. He was never cruel in ways she had feared. He did not beat her nor force her as the darker stories told, but his gaze carried the weight of command, as if every action she took reflected on him. When she faltered at her chores, his voice cut sharp and low, not shouting, but enough to shame her into silence. The women of the village were no kinder. Some saw her as weak, others as dangerous. She was an outsider in their world, a pale-skinned stranger who could never truly understand their ways. When she struggled with tasks that seemed second nature to them, tying water skins properly, weaving grasses into mats, or tanning hides, they mocked her clumsy hands. Laughter followed her like shadows. She tried at first to resist. Once, while fetching water from the river, she lingered too long, staring at the horizon. The thought whispered to her, "Run. Just keep walking until the land swallows you." But the river stretched out into empty plains, miles of grass and sky with no shelter, no food, no hope. She knew she would not survive a day alone. That night, when she returned late, Tahan was waiting. His jaw was set, his eyes like stone. He spoke sharply, words she only half understood, but the meaning was clear. She had disobeyed, she had shamed him. He gripped her arm, not in violence but in unyielding authority, and forced her to look at him. "No go," he said in broken English, the only words he had used in her tongue. "You stay." It was not a plea. It was law. Tears burned her eyes, but she bit them back, refusing to let him see her weakness. She hated him in that moment, hated his certainty, his control, his power over her fate. But she hated herself more for the flicker of fear that made her obey. Nights were no gentler. Though Tahan had not forced himself upon her in those first weeks, his presence in the teepee was suffocating. He lay close enough that she felt the heat of his body, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the scent of smoke and leather clinging to his skin. Each night she curled away from him, clutching her thin blanket like a shield, praying he would remain still. And yet, the uncertainty gnawed at her. Was he only waiting? Was this silence a prelude to something darker? Her fear sharpened with every passing night, until even sleep became a prison. During the day, she worked under the watchful eyes of the tribe. She learned to grind corn with aching arms, to carry water until her back throbbed, to stitch crude seams into hides though her fingers bled. The other women corrected her mistakes with sharp words or cold laughter, but little by little her hands grew steadier. Survival demanded she learn, and survival was the only thing she clung to. Once, when she spilled a basket of cornmeal, one of the older women snapped at her harshly, striking the ground with a stick. Embarrassment burned her cheeks as the others laughed. But before she could gather the mess, Tahan appeared, his shadow falling over the group. He spoke a few clipped words in his tongue, his voice low but firm, and the laughter ceased. The women cast her dark looks but said nothing more. She did not thank him. She would not. Gratitude felt like surrender. Still, something twisted inside her when she realized he had spared her further humiliation. The weeks dragged on. She grew thinner, her hands rougher, her spirit more caged. She dreamed of her home often, her mother's gentle touch, her father's voice telling stories by firelight, her brother's laughter. Each dream was a knife reminding her of all she had lost. Sometimes, when she thought no one watched, she wept. Once, as she cried softly in the teepee, she felt Tahan's gaze on her. He did not speak, did not touch, but the silence stretched heavy between them. She turned away, hating him for seeing her tears, hating herself for feeling anything at all beneath his watchful eyes. The tribe expected her to submit, and in many ways, she had no choice. But inside she carried a stubborn ember of defiance. She did what was required, but she did not give him her words, her trust, or her heart. She was his wife in name, his property in the eyes of his people. But inside she clung fiercely to the thought, I am still myself. They cannot take that. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the tribe gathered for a hunt's return. The men rode in with deer and bison meat, their voices loud with victory. The people celebrated, feasting and singing. She sat among the women, silent when Tahan approached. He placed a piece of roasted meat in her hand, his eyes steady. For a moment their gazes locked. He did not smile, did not soften, but there was something unreadable in his face, something beyond authority, beyond possession. It unsettled her more than anger ever could. She ate in silence, but that night, as she lay awake beside him, she realized the truth. He was no longer simply her captor. He was a man who carried expectations, responsibilities, and pride. He saw her not just as a woman stolen in war, but as something tied to his standing among his people. And while that knowledge did not make her prison lighter, it made it infinitely more complicated. The harsh beginning of their union was not marked by violence, but by a different cruelty, an invisible chain of expectations, silence, and control. She was bound to him by tradition and circumstance, yet separated from him by an ocean of resentment. And though her heart clung to hatred, though she longed for freedom more than anything, she could not ignore the uneasy truth whispering within her. This beginning was not the end. Something else was coming. Something she did not yet understand, something that frightened her more than captivity itself. The first thaw of spring brought a change to the village. Snow melted into mud, rivers swelled with rushing water, and the air carried the scent of new grass. The people moved camp to follow the herds, and with the shift came a rhythm of labor and survival that drew everyone into its flow. Even her. She had grown stronger since that first fearful month. Her hands, once soft, were calloused now. Her back, once fragile, carried water with endurance she never thought possible. Yet no amount of adaptation dulled the truth. She was still an outsider. Whispers followed her in the camp, eyes lingered, and sometimes the children dared to tug her hair and dart away, laughing at the pale stranger in their midst. Tahan remained a constant presence. His eyes, dark and unreadable, seemed to notice everything. At first his watchfulness felt like a cage. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that gaze shifted. Not just the eyes of a captor, but of a man ensuring her survival in a world that would gladly watch her fail. It began with small acts. One afternoon, as she struggled to split kindling with a dull hatchet, her hands blistering from the effort, she noticed him approach. She braced herself for criticism. Instead, without a word, he took the tool from her hand, set the wood upright, and split it cleanly in 2 swift strokes. Then he placed the hatchet back into her palms, nodding once as if to say, "Now you try." She mimicked his stance, awkwardly at first, until her strike landed true. The wood cracked. A thrill of triumph surged through her, brief and startling. When she glanced up, expecting a smirk or harsh word, she found only the faintest glimmer in his eyes, approval, quiet and restrained but unmistakable. Another time, when a group of boys mocked her broken attempts at their language, Tahan silenced them with a sharp command. They scattered instantly, casting guilty looks. She expected him to laugh, to share in their amusement, but instead he turned to her and repeated the words slowly, patiently, guiding her through the sounds until her tongue shaped them correctly. His voice was steady, his expression intent, as if her learning mattered. She hated the way her chest warmed at his patience. She told herself it was nothing, mere survival, his interest only practical. Yet that moment lingered in her thoughts long after. As the weeks unfolded, she began to see cracks in the mask he wore. One night, while the village feasted on the spoils of a hunt, she noticed him sitting apart from the revelry, staring into the fire. The others laughed, boasting of their kills, but Tahan's face was shadowed with something quieter. Hesitation? Weariness? She could not be sure. For the first time, she wondered what burdens he carried, what ghosts haunted him in the silence. She learned fragments of his story from the women, spoken in hushed tones when they forgot she was listening. His father had been a leader, a warrior of renown, killed in battle years before. His mother had died in childbirth, leaving him with only duty and expectation. Tahan had risen quickly among the warriors, fierce in combat, skilled with horse and bow. He was respected, feared even. But respect came with weight, and now the tribe looked to him for strength he could never falter in showing. The girl found herself studying him when she thought he would not notice. The proud set of his shoulders, the scar that ran along his ribs, the way he moved with the grace of someone born to the saddle. He was nothing like the boys she had known in her settlement. Rough-handed farmers, awkward and untested. He was fire and iron, shaped by a world she barely understood. And yet, in rare moments, she caught glimpses of something softer. One evening, she watched him toss scraps of meat to the village dogs, laughing low as the pups tumbled over one another. It was the first time she had ever heard him laugh, a sound deep and startling like a stone rolling through water. She looked away quickly, angry at herself for noticing. Another morning, when she cut her hand on a flint shard, he took her palm without hesitation. She tried to pull back, but his grip was steady as he cleaned the wound with water, then pressed a strip of hide into place. His touch was careful, his brow furrowed with concentration. She expected roughness, but instead found a gentleness she did not know he possessed. "Good," he said when he finished, the word awkward in his broken English. His eyes held hers for a heartbeat too long before he released her hand. That night she could not sleep. The memory of his fingers on hers burned hotter than the campfire outside. She hated the confusion swirling inside her, fear tangled with something she dared not name. It became harder to see him only as her captor. And yet, she fought the thought. Every time she caught herself softening, she remembered the raid, the smoke, her brother's scream. She reminded herself that this life had been forced upon her, that she had never chosen him, but her heart, stubborn traitor that it was, began to whisper what her mind refused, that he was more than chains. One day, while gathering wood near the river, a sudden storm swept over the plains. Rain lashed down, soaking her dress, and the wind tore branches from the trees. She stumbled, nearly dropping her bundle, when Tahan appeared on horseback, rain streaming down his shoulders. Without a word, he swung down, took her hand, and pulled her onto the horse behind him. She clung to him as the animal galloped through mud and water, his body solid against hers, his arm firm around her waist. The storm roared, but she felt only the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, the heat of his body shielding her from the cold. By the time they reached the village, her breath was ragged, her pulse racing with more than fear. He dismounted, helping her down gently, his hand lingering at her waist a moment too long. Their eyes met, rain dripping from his lashes, and in that instant something shifted. She saw not just the warrior, not just the captor, but the man, the human beneath the armor of duty. And in his eyes she glimpsed something that stole her breath. Longing, restrained and buried, but undeniable. She turned away quickly, trembling. Desire was dangerous. Desire blurred chains into bonds, captivity into closeness. Desire could make her forget who she was, what she had lost. And yet, no matter how she tried to bury it, she could not erase the truth. Glimpses of humanity had cracked the walls she built around her heart. And once the cracks began, the flood could not be stopped. Summer came to the plains in a blaze of heat. The grasses grew tall, the rivers shrank in their beds, and the earth shimmered beneath the relentless sun. The village pulsed with life. Hunts grew longer, feasts more frequent, and the nights were filled with song and drums. Yet for her the season brought not joy, but a restlessness she could neither understand nor deny. By now she had learned much of their ways. Her hands stitched hides with steady precision, Her feet carried water without stumbling, and her tongue shaped their language enough to make herself understood. She no longer drew constant laughter, though suspicion never fully faded from the women's eyes. But the greatest change was not in her skills, nor in their acceptance. It was in the space between her and Tahan. At first, their union had been silent, harsh, a cage forged by duty. Now, silence between them was different. It was charged heavy with unspoken words and something far more dangerous, longing. She felt it in the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, in the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. Aya, he called her, reshaping her foreign name into a sound that carried warmth. She felt it in the way his hand brushed hers when passing food, in the way his presence filled the teepee at night, pressing against her thoughts even when he did not touch her. And she hated herself for feeling it, even as her body betrayed her. The first time it overwhelmed her was by the river. She had gone to wash clothing, kneeling in the cool water, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Tahan appeared on the bank, leading his horse to drink. For a moment she thought he would pass without a glance. But his eyes found her, and in them she saw something that stole the breath from her lungs. It was not the gaze of a captor. It was hunger, deep and raw, tempered only by restraint. Her heart thundered in her chest. She looked away quickly, but the heat in her cheeks betrayed her. That night, as she lay in the teepee, she could not stop replaying the look in his eyes. Desire was a dangerous fire. It consumed. It blurred the line between chains and choice. Yet the more she tried to smother it, the more it smoldered within her. It came alive again when he began teaching her to ride. At first, she refused, insisting in broken words that she wanted no part of his lessons. But Tahan was patient, insistent. He led a small mare to her, calm and sure-footed, and placed the reins in her hands. "Trust," he said simply. Her hands trembled, but his presence steadied her. When she hesitated to mount, he lifted her effortlessly, his hands firm at her waist. She gasped at the sudden closeness, her body brushing his, and for a fleeting heartbeat, she felt safe. More than safe, she felt wanted. He mounted behind her, guiding her hands on the reins, his breath warm against her ear. The horse moved beneath them, swaying with rhythm, and every step sent a shiver through her. She wanted to hate it, wanted to call it another form of control, but instead her body leaned back into him, her heart racing with a desire she could no longer deny. When the lesson ended, she slid from the horse too quickly, stumbling away with flushed cheeks. Tahan said nothing, only watched her with eyes that held both fire and restraint. That night, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt again the weight of his hands on her waist, the heat of his chest against her back. She turned restlessly, hating herself, hating him, hating the treacherous part of her heart that whispered, what if it was not only duty? What if it was something more? The storm broke weeks later. It was a feast night, the tribe celebrating a successful raid. The fire burned high, drums thundered, and men boasted of their victories. She sat apart as always, her eyes drawn unwillingly to Tahan. He stood tall among the warriors, his face painted, his body alive with pride. He was the center of every gaze, yet when his eyes met hers across the fire, the world fell away. Something passed between them then, unspoken, undeniable. Her breath caught, her pulse raced, and she looked away too late. Later, as the village drifted to sleep, he returned to their teepee. The air was thick with smoke and silence. She sat rigid, her heart pounding as he entered. He paused as though weighing a decision, then stepped closer. For the first time he did not command, did not assume. His hand lifted, hovering near her face, waiting. She could have pulled back. She could have turned away, but something inside her broke. A dam too long held against a rising tide. Slowly, trembling, she let his touch graze her cheek. The contact was electric, setting her skin aflame. His fingers traced her jaw, gentle, reverent, as though she were something fragile. Her breath shuddered, her resolve crumbled. And when he bent his head, she did not stop him. His lips brushed hers, tentative, searching. Not the kiss of a conqueror, but of a man uncertain, yearning. And she answered. The world vanished in that moment. Fear, grief, resentment, all blurred into the heat of his mouth, the strength of his arms, the fire that roared to life between them. She had sworn she would never yield, never want. Yet here she was, burning with desire for the very man she had once prayed to escape. When they parted, breathless, He rested his forehead against hers. Aya, he whispered, her name trembling in the air like a vow. Tears stung her eyes, not of fear but of confusion. She had lost everything, been bound against her will, and yet her heart betrayed her. For the first time she saw not just the warrior, not just the captor, but the man who wanted not obedience. But her desire had changed them both. For him, it was no longer enough that she wore his name, lived in his tipi, worked among his people. He wanted her heart freely given, her affection not born of fear but of choice. And for her, the lines blurred until she no longer knew where hatred ended and yearning began. The night stretched on in silence, thick with the weight of what had happened. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, whether she would regret, resist, or surrender further. But she knew one thing with terrifying clarity. She could never again see Tahan as only her captor. The fire of desire had awakened something neither of them could control, and nothing would ever be the same. The kiss changed everything. For days afterward, the air between them was different, heavier, charged, alive with a current neither could ignore. Where once there had been silence born of duty, now there was silence born of restraint, as though both feared what might happen if words broke free. She avoided his eyes, yet found herself seeking them when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with his usual pride and discipline, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand sometimes lingered near hers, uncertain whether to reach or withdraw. The village noticed. They always did. Whispers trailed behind her when she carried water, and the older women cast sharp, assessing looks. To them, desire between husband and wife was no scandal. It was expected. But she was still the outsider, the pale stranger. Some muttered that she had bewitched him, that Tahan's pride was softening in ways dangerous for a man destined to lead. For her part, she felt trapped in a war within herself. Each time he brushed against her in passing, a tremor ran through her body. Each time his eyes softened, her chest ached with confusion. She still remembered the raid, the fire, the scream of her brother. She still burned with the injustice of being taken, of never having chosen this path, and yet, in the quiet of night when his breath stirred the space between them, she longed for the warmth of his arms. The conflict tormented her, until one night it spilled into words. They sat by the river, the camp quiet behind them, the stars bright overhead. Tahan had brought her there, away from prying eyes, his expression solemn. "You hate me," he said in halting English. It was not a question, but a truth spoken aloud. Her throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to ease the weight in his voice, but honesty forced itself free. "I did," she whispered. I don't know." His eyes searched hers, dark and unflinching. "Not choice," he said. "I know." He placed a hand against his chest. "But heart, I want." The word struck her like a blow. He was not asking for obedience. He was not demanding submission. He was confessing, with a vulnerability that startled her, that he wanted what could never be forced. Her love. Tears stung her eyes, unbidden. She turned away, trembling. "You took my life," she said softly. "My family. Everything I knew." His jaw clenched, but he did not look away. "I take," he admitted. "But I give too. I give me." The simplicity of his words, their raw honesty, undid her. She wept then openly, and for the first time he reached not as a captor but as a man offering solace. His arms closed around her, holding her steady as her grief poured out. And when her tears subsided, when she leaned against him exhausted, she realized she was no longer afraid. That night, their bond changed. It was not sudden surrender, nor the erasure of pain. It was something fragile, tentative, like a seed pressing through hard soil. He treated her differently in the days that followed, not as property but as partner. He asked her opinion in small matters, waited for her nod before decisions. He taught her their ways with patience, not authority, and slowly, she found herself giving pieces of trust she had thought forever broken. The shift did not go unnoticed. One morning, a group of warriors returned from a raid, boasting of their spoils. Among them was a man who had always eyed her with contempt, his gaze sharp with envy toward Tahan. He spat words in their tongue, mocking, questioning whether a woman from another world could truly be a Comanche wife. She understood enough to feel the insult burn her cheeks. Before she could lower her gaze, Tahan stepped forward, his voice a whip of authority. The challenger fell silent beneath his glare. The matter ended there, but that night Tahan's shoulders carried a weight she had not seen before. "They test," he said simply. "Test me, test us." For the first time she placed her hand over his. "Then let them," she whispered. "We are strong enough." The words surprised her as much as him. But they were true. Somehow, against all odds, she no longer saw herself only as captive. She was part of him and he of her. Seasons turned. She learned their songs, their dances, their ways of honoring the hunt and the spirits of the land. She laughed with the children, stitched alongside the women, rode horses across the plains with hair flying in the wind. And always Tahan was there, sometimes watching with quiet pride, sometimes riding beside her, sometimes holding her in the privacy of their teepee, where desire no longer frightened her but bound them closer. Love did not erase the past. It did not bring back her family or the life she had lost, but it gave her something new, a bond forged not by force, but by choice slowly grown from ashes. One evening, as the sun sank in a blaze of red across the horizon, she sat beside Tahan on a rise overlooking the endless plains. His hand found hers, rough and warm, their fingers intertwining with ease. "You are mine," he said softly, not with the voice of a conqueror, but with the reverence of a vow. She turned to him, meeting his gaze. For the first time she did not flinch, did not resist. "And you are mine." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of truth. The girl who had once been dragged into the village a trembling captive was gone. In her place stood a woman who had endured loss, faced fear, and found something unexpected in the heart of the man she once despised. A different kind of bond had been born between them, fragile, imperfect, but real. It was not the bond of chains but of hearts, and though the world might still test them, though shadows of the past would never fully fade, they would face it together, side by side.